Due to the demanding environment, aircraft operating from carriers must be specially designed. However, sometimes there were operations with the use of airplanes originally unfit for the flight deck. Here are the top 6 most unusual aircraft that operated on carrier.
Number 1. Lockheed P2V Neptune. At the end of the World War II, the US Navy felt the need to acquire a nuclear strike capability to maintain its political influence. In short term, carrier-based aircraft were the best solution, but the large, fat man nuclear munitions at that time were bulky and required a very large aircraft to carry them. The US Navy Bureau of Ordnance built 25 outdated but more compact Little Boy nuclear bomb designs to be used by smaller planes. Unfortunately, at that time, the US Navy did not have an aircraft capable of carrying this type of bomb. That's why they improvised a carrier-based nuclear strike aircraft by modifying the Lockheed P2V Neptune. Getting such a big aircraft off a carrier's deck was impressive when the Neptune had not been designed to do such things. 11 P2Vs were built to provide the US Navy with the carrier-launched nuclear strike capability. To enable the launch from the carrier, the planes were equipped with 8 JETO boosting rocket engines, 4 on each side. The formation of this new squadron was the result of a series of successful test takeoffs from the USS Coral Sea and USS Midway in the summer of 1948. These tests proved that the modified P2Vs were able to deliver Little Boy atomic weapon after takeoff from an aircraft carrier. However, the Neptune could not land on the carrier. Therefore, the crew had to either make their way to a friendly land base after a strike or ditch in the sea near the US Navy vessel. Eventually, it was replaced in the emergency role by the North American A.J. Savage, the first nuclear strike aircraft that was fully capable of carrier launch and recovery operations. Number 2. Lockheed U-2 Dragon Lady. For many years, the U-2 Dragon Lady was the most important spy plane in the US fleet. However, despite having a great range of 3,000 miles, it had to use airports in Allied countries during long-distance missions, which was not an ideal solution. Therefore, the CIA decided to implement a program aimed at adapting the aircraft to operate from aircraft carriers. The first trials took place in August 1963 on the USS Kitty Hawk aircraft carrier. The pilot, Bob Schumacher, wearing a pressure suit, had no problems with taking off. Due to its characteristics, the plane climbed relatively easily, but landing was a lot more problematic. The glider-like design gives great lift, which is a great advantage in a long-distance flight at high altitudes. But it's also a source of problems when it comes to land on a short carrier's deck, because despite cutting the throttle, the plane still wants to fly and refuses to settle down like normal Navy planes do. Although the speed difference between the plane and the ship was only 50 knots, the plane bounced off the deck and struggled to climb again, and Schumacher had to land at a ground airport in Burbank, 100 miles away. Despite the partial failure, the CIA felt that the attempt was promising and decided to make some modifications to the original aircraft's design, this time using 2 U-2G models. The landing gear has been reinforced, a fuel dumping system has been installed, and mechanical spoilers have been added to the top of the wings. Raising them drastically reduced the lift, so that the plane could fall onto the deck like a brick. After several touch-and-go attempts on the USS Ranger, Schumacher felt confident enough to perform a full-stop landing. It was not perfect, because when the plane caught the wire, the tail rose upwards and its nose hit the deck, damaging the pitot tube. However, it was just a minor damage which was repaired in a couple of days. Since then, a series of successful takeoffs and landing attempts have been carried out, and 5 pilots have been trained to operate from the deck of aircraft carriers. Several successful reconnaissance missions were also carried out. In 1967, much larger and more capable U-2R appeared, and 2 years later also it was adapted to operate from aircraft carriers. However, the cost of air operations and the rapid development of the satellite technology meant that the program was finally shut down in the mid of 1970s. Number 3. Lockheed C-130 Hercules. Every aircraft carrier, apart from combat and reconnaissance, also carries transport planes, the so-called carrier on-board delivery. They are used to transport personnel, cargo, mail and supplies. The airplane used for such tasks in the 60s was the Grumman C-1 Trader, a twin-piston engine plane, but its limited payload capacity and 300-mile range was not enough for mid-ocean operating carrier groups. Therefore, in 1963, US Navy came up with the idea to adapt the 4-engine C-130 Hercules to the role of a naval transport plane. Although at first glance the idea seemed crazy, in October 1963 a single C-130 borrowed from the US Marines appeared aboard the USS Forrestal aircraft carrier, with Lieutenant James H. Flatley at the controls. The tests were carried out at a relative wind speed of about 40 to 50 knots. With 132 feet of wingspan, the plane was taking off along a specially painted line, and its wingtip cleared the island just 15 feet away. Both takeoffs and landings took place without any additional launching and arresting gear. During initial trials, it turned out that the plane was doing extremely well, both in takeoffs and landings. There were 29 touch-and-go landings and 21 full-stop landings, with total aircraft's weight between 85 to 121,000 pounds. During one test, the plane managed to stop 267 feet from touchdown, which was twice its wingspan. At maximum load, the C-130 only needed 745 feet to take off and 460 feet to land. On the last attempt, Flatley touched down 150 feet from the beginning of the landing pad, stopped 270 feet away, and then took off from that position using the rest of the deck. It has been calculated that the plane would be able to carry a payload of 25,000 pounds from a distance of 2,050 miles and land safely on a carrier. Nevertheless, the US Navy considered the Hercules air operations to be too risky and decided to stay with smaller transport airplanes. Lieutenant Flatley was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, and C-130 became the largest and heaviest aircraft to ever land on aircraft carrier, which is a record that stands to this day. Number 4. North American B-25 Mitchell. After the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, President Roosevelt expressed his wish to carry out a bombing raid on Japan as a symbolic retaliation to raise American morale. At that time, the Americans did not have any airbase close enough to Japan to launch an attack, and bombers operating on the aircraft carriers did not have sufficient range. After detailed analysis, it was decided to use the B-25 Mitchell medium bombers normally operating from ground airfields and adapted to take off from an aircraft carrier. The first tests were carried out in February 1942 on a USS Hornet aircraft carrier using 2 unmodified aircraft. The tests were successful and the project was approved for implementation. Lieutenant Colonel James Jimmy Doolittle was selected to perform the task. His initial plan was to take off from an aircraft carrier, bomb Tokyo and land in China. In order to enable the planes to take off and reduce their weight, all unnecessary equipment such as the bottom turret, de-icing installation, armor plates and northern bomb sight have been removed. On April 1, 1942, in San Francisco, 16 aircraft were placed on the USS Hornet aircraft carrier. Due to their size and lack of folding wings, they did not fit on the hangar deck and therefore they were all placed on the flight deck. The launch was supposed to take place 500 miles from Tokyo, but due to the fact that the carrier was spotted by Japanese patrol, it was decided to accelerate it and eventually the planes took off 650 miles from the target. To reduce fuel consumption even further, the aircraft's guns were replaced by painted black broomsticks to deceive the enemy. At 8 AM, Vice Admiral Halsey ordered the plane to take off. The first aircraft only had 150 meters of deck to take off. For pilots, it was the first ever launch from an aircraft carrier. The bombers reached their targets in Japan around noon. In Tokyo, they approached at the final phase of anti-aircraft exercises and were mistaken for Japanese planes. The planes dropped bombs on Tokyo, Nagoya, Kobe and Osaka. In the Japanese capital, they destroyed a tank factory, a weapons depot, and a Japanese ship in a dry dock. The surprise was complete. None of the bombers were shot down by the anti-aircraft defense. A return to the aircraft carrier was never planned. One of the planes landed near Vladivostok. The rest of the airmen bailed out over China. The attack on Tokyo did not cause significant damage, but had a huge psychological impact. It gave the Americans faith in a victory, and the Japanese realized that their territory was within the range of enemy planes. Number 5. Cessna 01 Bird Dog. In 1975, during the last days of the Vietnam War, the North Vietnamese army approached the gates of Saigon. Its fall was inevitable, so the Americans developed a plan to evacuate most of the remaining personnel by air using helicopters. An evacuation fleet gathered on the shores of Vietnam with the USS Midway carrier ready to receive the fugitives. On April 28th, the Operation Frequent Wind began. Dozens of helicopters filled with fleeing passengers performed shuttle flights between Saigon and the fleet. South Vietnamese Air Force Major Buang Lai lived on Con Son Island, about 50 miles off the southern coast. He decided to evacuate with his family on his own, using a stolen small O-1 Bird Dog plane, which was a modified Cessna 170. After taking off, the Major headed towards the evacuation fleet, and after some time he approached the USS Midway. Unfortunately, its entire deck was littered with helicopters, which made the landing impossible. To make things worse, Major Buang did not take the headphones with him, so he did not have radio communication with the carrier. While circling the vessel, he hand-wrote a request on the map. "Can you move these helicopters to the other side? I can land on your runway. I can fly 1 hour more. We have enough time to move. Please rescue me, Major Buang, wife and 5 child." He wrapped the note in the pistol holster and threw it on the deck. The sailors gathered the note and handed it to the ship's commander, Captain Lawrence Chambers. After reading it, Chambers made a bold decision to remove some of the helicopters overboard and make room for the Major. At the same time, he ordered to remove all the arresting wires and accelerate the ship to 25 knots, which, with a wind of 15 knots, gave about 14 knots of relative wind for landing aircraft. Although the relative speed between Cessna and the carrier was only 20 knots, the approach was not easy, mainly because of dangerous downdrafts that naturally occur behind the ship's fantail. But after 2 test approaches, Major Buang made a perfect landing, stopping the plane in the middle of the runway. The brave pilot and his family left the plane safe and sound amid a storm of applause from the carrier's crew. Number 6. US Navy Flight Deck Boots. Shooters are probably one of the most recognizable flight deck crew members. Their responsibility is to ensure the catapult is prepared and ready to launch aircraft, the aircraft is properly configured to launch, all personnel are in their proper position, and any observers are behind the fall lines. Shooters are often naval aviators or flight officers. When the shooter finishes his tour on the deck, a special ceremony is performed. As a final goodbye, the departing catapult officer removes his boots and affixes them to the steam-powered catapult on the flight deck. Once connected, the shooter gives the go-ahead and his or her boots are launched off to the side and never to be seen again.
That's it for today. If you liked this video and would like to see more, please support this channel by leaving like and comment, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Thanks for watching and see you next time.